This is the Galaxy S22. It released earlier this year for not a lot of fanfare, and generally the response was, it's another good phone, but it just doesn't stand up to the more expensive S22 Plus and S22 Ultra. And now here at the end of the year, it doesn't have the same sort of sparkle and newness as the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro. But I would argue that if you're in the market looking for an incredible phone that can fit in your hand, then you probably should consider this over the iPhone 14, especially because it was such a letdown this year. Let's talk about it. This is InnoIso, and this is the Galaxy S22 review. The Galaxy S22 has the same design as the Galaxy S22 Plus that I took a look at earlier this year, but let's just do a quick review of the design. Samsung unfortunately went the Apple route this year by adding these more squared off but rounded sides to the frame of the phone and making it super glossy and fingerprinty. Thankfully, it doesn't show off nearly as bad with this kind of green tinted aluminum, but I don't love the whole fact that this unfortunately has the same sort of design as the iPhone 13 Pro and now iPhone 14 Pro. I thought Samsung had a winner in design on their hands with the Galaxy S21 series, but I guess this is kind of what they imagined would be more popular, and so they went with this. That's not to say it's a bad design. It's an incredibly clean, and I absolutely love this color to the point where I basically want to paint my entire house this color now. It's just this very, very deep forest green that just destroys any of the iPhone colors this year. The camera bump no longer seamlessly blends into the edge of the frame, and notably it doesn't have the same sort of gloss that the frame has, which is probably a good thing. But I just don't know why they didn't take the same sort of matte metal design of the camera bump and put it on the rest of the phone. This phone is just millimeters smaller than the iPhone 13 Pro in every direction, and I really felt the difference. With the Galaxy S22 Plus, I felt the extra bulk was really felt, and anytime I reached into my pocket, I thought it was my iPhone 13 Pro until I got used to it. Here, I know it's my Galaxy S22 because it just feels just that much more compact. And that means that despite the fact that I don't love the squared off edges, the ergonomics with this phone are still very, very good. And while I do have a little bit larger hands, I can really easily grip the phone such that I can still touch it and use it one-handed, despite the fact that it has those kind of hard, sharp edges. And they're still a little bit more comfortable in my hands than the iPhone 14 Pro's design. While I don't typically use a case with my phones, I do have this kind of soft silicone case that comes with this phone that I felt was not bad. I felt that it kept the phone a little bit more protected, so I was less worried about drops and stuff like that. And because this phone is still very small, it offers enough grip that I can still use the phone in one hand, but it doesn't mean that it's going to slip out of my hands at any time. What I love about it the most over my iPhone 14 Pro is the fact that there's no notch, there's no massive dynamic island. Instead, the front-facing camera is tiny, and it just barely blocks out a tiny little black spot in the image that is not distracting in full screen video and still takes very, very good photos. Like most other Android flagships of the year, this has 120 Hz refresh rate, which I'm not particularly sensitive to refresh rate. I don't notice a huge amount of difference, but if you are sensitive, then you will notice the big upgrade over even the iPhone 14 this year, which despite its incredibly high price point, still doesn't have more than 60 Hz refresh rate, which is just so mind-boggling. But I guess Apple really wants people to switch to the iPhone 14 Pro. Watching any sort of YouTube or Netflix on this phone was just so incredible. It's so punchy and there's so much brightness and so colorful. Everything looks incredible. And while I was a little bit disappointed with the smaller screen real estate that I didn't get, and while I was a little bit disappointed from switching from my Galaxy S22 Ultra's massive amount of screen real estate, this still was comfortable watching in most situations. And there's similar amount of screen real estate when watching content to the iPhone 14 Pro. The software on all Galaxy devices has improved greatly in the last 3 or 4 years to the point where I really don't think it's a bad experience using One UI over any other sort of brand of Android. Actually, I greatly prefer One UI over Pixel's software, for example, because it's not nearly as aggressive with the fluorescent colors, instead offering you more muted, basic primary colors to add to your UI. Android 13 will be coming soon, and Android 12 is perfectly fine with all of the features that you've come to expect out of a modern version of Android, and it looks really good on One UI. The ace in the hole for me are the cameras. While I was missing the extra super zoom lens, the Galaxy S22 Ultra series, like 10 times zoom, I did appreciate the 3 camera lenses that came on this device: standard, wide angle, and telephoto. It's kind of amazing that you have 3 sensors on a Galaxy S22, but you don't get 3 sensors on an iPhone 14. But maybe if you don't really need the telephoto lens, then you can just do fine with the first 2. Now, I personally didn't use the telephoto lens nearly as much as I would with a super zoom lens, but it still allows me to frame shots a little bit better if they happen to be in the distance. It allows me to not punch in and zoom in using digital zoom, and instead frame a shot properly using completely optical zoom. I personally prefer the color science that Samsung uses over just about any other smartphone manufacturer. I used to really like Pixel devices, but I think they've gotten a little bit more muted and boring over more recently. And so if I were to side-by-side compare the Galaxy S22 to my iPhone 14 Pro, more often than not, I prefer the image coming out of the Galaxy S22. While Apple tends to be pretty good at portrait shots, considering they kind of pioneered it in the first place, I think they're still very, very far behind on night mode, especially because they don't really give you a lot of flexibility to go into night mode when you want to. The only downside I saw with the Galaxy S22 is there was the occasional time where I take a shot in a relatively dimly lit, cloudy day, and Samsung would blow it out and bring out a lot of exposure and warmth that just wasn't there. Anytime that happened, technically I could tweak the image to make it look get that dreary emotion that I really wanted, but it would have been nice to get that directly out of the camera rather than having to change the settings or edit afterwards. Thankfully, Samsung has really caught up, at least delivered a significantly better experience when it comes to recording video on the Galaxy S22 over prior Samsung phones. The stabilization is significantly better, and I will say the sharpness of videos is substantially better. I often use my Galaxy S22 as an overhead camera in a lot of my videos whenever I was recording, working on a MacBook or anything like that. And the videos that came out looked pretty darn good. Now, granted, I don't think that quite has the same sort of stabilization capability of the iPhone series. I would say that if you're walking with your phone, there's still going to be a little bit of jelliness every time the camera vibrates that you wouldn't get quite as much with the iPhone. But for most cases, if you're kind of standing still, the videos coming out of the Galaxy S22 are going to be just as good, if not better in many cases, because of that same color science. In terms of processing capabilities, the Galaxy S22 comes with the same Snapdragon series chip that most Android flagships have released with this year. Now, granted, we've moved on to the Snapdragon 1 Plus or anything like that, but the good news is if you're going with this phone, you're going to have an incredibly fast and fluid experience for several years in the future. I know that Apple loves to brag about how fast their processors are, but in most daily use, you're not going to notice a difference, and you're still going to get a great experience, especially if you plan on using the phone for, say, less than 3 or 4 years. Now, if you happen to be coming from an iPhone, then there's one thing I do want to warn you about when it comes to the Galaxy S22, or really any Android phone. Chances are, over that 3 or 4 year time span, your phone is going to depreciate significantly faster in value, not necessarily in capabilities. And so at the end of that time span, if you want to trade up or you want to sell it to somebody, you're going to get less value than your iPhone. So while at MSRP, the Galaxy S22 is comparable to the price of the iPhone 14, actually quite a bit cheaper, in reality, the real price of the Galaxy S22 is substantially less expensive. And so often when you're buying the Galaxy S22, you can get buy one, get one free promotions or trade-in deals, or you can especially get additional benefits like, for example, you can get a free smartwatch with a lot of Galaxy purchases. That should substantially bring down the price that you won't get if you're buying an iPhone 14 for MSRP. If you happen to be considering switching from an iOS device over to Android, then you need to be very, very aware about the switch away from iMessage, which there's been a lot of coverage on in recent weeks. You should check out my video if you haven't gotten the opportunity to, where I dive into iMessage, Google Messages, and Google's messaging strategy, which might be informative and helpful and maybe a little bit interesting. For anyone, iOS user or Android user, if you're considering the Galaxy S22 today, you should not pay MSRP. We're 6 months into the release cycle for the Samsung Galaxy phones, so chances are in 6 months we're going to be seeing a new one, and the value of the Galaxy S22 is going to drop substantially. So chances are you should be able to find it at a substantial discount, which means that you should be able to get the phone for $500, maybe less, maybe effectively a lot less. Which reminds me of another phone that came out this year that I reviewed, the Pixel 6a, which was also a very, very impressive device. But notably, the difference between the Pixel 6a and the Galaxy S22 is that the Pixel 6a is an incredible phone for the price of $450, and the Galaxy S22 is an incredible phone. No conditions. Every phone is going to have some sort of compromise. This one in particular doesn't have nearly the battery life or the camera capabilities of the Galaxy S22 Ultra, but just about any other phone it can stand up pretty well against and give a great experience. Great pictures, great performance, and a very, very premium design. In terms of battery life, yes, this was not a battery champ, but typically I could get about 6.5 hours of screen on time in most days. And by the time I get home through a normal use day, I was looking at about 30 to 35% battery remaining. So this isn't a 2-day phone, but overnight, if I didn't charge it overnight and woke up in the morning, I'd probably still have a good 20% to make it a couple hours before I have to put it back on the charger, which is not all that bad and substantially better than a lot of phones from just a couple years ago. A lot of small phones have gone away in the past. More recently, it was the iPhone 13 mini. And while this isn't iPhone 13 mini sized, and notably one of my regular commenters and followers, Digital Guy, is going to complain about how this phone isn't quite as small as Galaxies from the past. By the way, if you already left that comment, Digital Guy, don't edit it, don't delete it, because I'd love to see it, and I thought it would be pretty funny. Yes, this isn't as small as Galaxy phones in the past. It's still relatively large compared to those. But as far as a one-handed experience, it still offers a decent one-handed experience considering all of the other phones in the market are significantly larger. And that little bit of difference between the size of this and the iPhone 14 or 14 Pro really makes a big difference in terms of the one-handedness experience. I'll also call out that the under-screen fingerprint sensor is top-notch. It's incredible. There's no top-notch. It's incredible. It's better than just about any other in-screen fingerprint sensor in the markets, or as good at least, and it's very, very fast, reliable, and frankly, I don't know who would ever want Face ID over it because it's just so much better, especially considering that sometimes cases are still up and some people still wear masks nowadays. And yes, Apple technically created a mask ID, but the fact that people went 2 years without being able to use their iPhones is just so frustrating. And so a fingerprint sensor that works under the screen works very effortlessly. You don't have to pick up the phone and show it to your face. It's incredible. And I really don't think there's a lot of better alternatives. Thank you for watching InnoIso. I hope you liked this review of the Galaxy S22. I honestly really, really love this phone, and honestly, the only downside of this phone is the fact that I can't keep more than 2 phones in my pocket at any time. And yes, I would love to use this as my primary daily driver, but the fact that it doesn't have the 10x zoom lens and the fact that it doesn't fold in half means that it just falls short a little bit from some other products that I have options of. I really enjoyed this phone though, and if you are looking on the market for a small great phone, this is the one to get. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked this video. Let me know down in the comments what you think about the Galaxy S22. Get subscribed, and I'll catch you in the next one.